Did anyone else have a chance to go through the book, the first chapter?
Yeah, I did too.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's very important that you read the chapter or try to read the chapter every time before lecture, because this way the information that we go through in lecture will make more sense to you. It will be a form of a review as well, and I will not go through every detail in lecture, so because that's a lot of information, even though we will cover quite a bit of information. So I will just focus on the most important bits or the most difficult bits. And then if there's anything else from from the chapters that is puzzling or unclear, then you can of course ask during class. Okay, Isaiah, but do you have the book now?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's good. Okay, so let's start. So do you see my lecture note here, or the lecture note that is also in the book?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, so when someone says psychology or psychological tests, what comes to mind? What kind of reactions what kind of reactions pop up in your mind when you hear that?
Level of thinking.
Level of thinking? What do you mean?
Like how critically that person can think in a various way, or I mean the IQ or EQ, the emotional level.
Okay, so intelligence or emotional intelligence, you associate psychology with that, yes?
Pavlov's dog, I guess.
Okay, good. That's definitely part of it, but that's just a small part of it. Good. Anyone else?
Like how better he can he or she can function in her daily life.
Based on what?
The situation.
Okay, so how do you link that? How do you connect that to psychology as a study?
Sorry,
It's okay.
with the anger or with the happiness, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're talking about self-improvement?
Kind of.
Or how can one act differently in different situations or improve one's behavior or habits?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's definitely that, and that's part of what we call positive psychology, which draws on knowledge of various psychological experiments or sub-disciplines to inform people how to live better or how to live happier lives or how to be more productive or how to be more professional or how to develop better relationships with other people. So that's definitely part of it. Okay, so today I want to introduce psychology, stress that it is a science and that it uses critical thinking or scientific thinking as opposed to naive realism or intuition. and then the kind of how psychologists conduct experiments. And I think that will be, we will leave it at that. And then next week I will pick up on research ethics a little bit and move on to biological psychology where we look at the brain and how the brain processes or represents information. Okay, so when someone says critical thinking, what comes to mind usually?
Analyzing text and forming your own opinion.
Okay, good. What does it mean to analyze a text?
Like take all the information, look at it from like a different lens. Don't just accept it or say don't accept it or accept it. Read through it carefully, decide, is this true? How did they come to this, etc.
Okay, so let's say you're reading an article. Is it anything that you've read recently that caught your attention that's related to anything? It doesn't have to be related to psychology. It can be related to something scientific. It can be related to something psychological. Was there anything on the news lately or anything that you have read that you wanted to question or you were skeptical about? Or maybe anyone else you've wondered whether this is actually true? You hear people say it, oh yeah, this is true, that is true, this happens. But is there anything that you have recently thought about or heard or saw that you were skeptical about, that you didn't really quite believe was true, or maybe you questioned whether it was true?
How can I share that I am existing?
That you're skeptical that you exist?
Sometimes.
Yeah,
Will
you can
this
be
all
skeptical
be
about
some
that.
kind of big simulation or brain in the market, or I guess?
Yeah, kind of like a matrix scenario. Yeah, you can be skeptical about that. Definitely. I mean, you can be skeptical about pretty much anything. So when we are skeptical about something, that means we don't trust it at face value, and that is part of critical thinking, and that is part of scientific thinking. All of this comes from philosophy, because philosophy is an attitude. It's an attitude in thinking about the everyday world, the external world, and our relationship to it, with physical things and with human beings as well. And it's also a relationship to ourselves. So, well, let's take the vaccine, for example, right? There are a lot of people, there are many people that trust the vaccine, and there are a lot of people that don't trust the vaccine. This is playing out in the world right now. What should you know to trust the vaccine? Or what would you want to know to trust the vaccine?
Will it be safe enough to be vaccinated?
Yeah, is it safe? So in order to establish whether a vaccine or a drug or a therapy is safe, what do we do? What do scientists do?
Research.
Yes, we conduct research. Do we just conduct one experiment to establish that?
No, you
they
do
go
more than
through
one.
time.
Yes. So ideally what you want, let's say, someone to conduct experiments in Canada or in China or in South Africa or in Bangladesh or in Australia or Poland, right? And ideally you want similar results. That means you want experiments to be replicated. And when experiments can be replicated with more or less the same results, that means that means your research is, or the way you're testing is reliable. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But what's important here is to have a critical thinking cap on all the time. So when someone says, oh, you know, the pandemic is a hoax, the vaccine doesn't work, it's to control people, then you can, you know, easily ask questions. Well, what is the evidence for that? And if people can't come up with evidence, that means there is something you should be definitely skeptical, right? Is there evidence to the contrary? Has the vaccine been shown to be healthy and successful? Yes or no? So these are the kind of questions you should be asking, you know, and you should be, so skepticism is about questioning. You examine assumptions, assess the source. What is the source? Have there been experiments conducted? Who is saying, who's being skeptical, or who's advocating, or who's negating a specific statement? So if people say, well, the vaccine is good and the pandemic is real, who is saying it? Okay, how many people are saying it? Is it actually true? Do sick people do people who contract COVID end up in hospitals? Yes, they do. Do people who contract COVID end up in intensive care units? Yes, they do. Do people who contract COVID die? Yes, they do. So there's a lot of evidence that the virus is among us and that it is dangerous. Okay, so uncover hidden values, weigh evidence, and assess conclusions. Okay, so there's many different ways that you can test this. You can, so even without conducting experiments, you can use critical thinking to assess claims. If someone says, you know, that the world is flat, the first thing you should be asking, well, is there any evidence that the world is flat? Well, someone might say, well, hold on a second. When I'm at a flat plane, let's say you are at a soccer field or you are at a farm and everything looks flat. And you say to yourself, well, hold on a second. When I look out into the distance, everything looks flat. So it must be flat. Now, can you trust this claim?
No.
Can you trust your vision? Can you trust your perception to make true claims about the world?
I mean, you can trust your vision, but it's not enough proof.
Why not?
Well, we can easily mistake things, or some things are beyond how much we can see. So how much can we really prove that, right?
Yeah, so we have to be mindful that our vision is limited. We can only see so far, we can only see so much, right? So just because something looks flat, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily flat. In the same way, when you have, let's say, a glass of water, you have a clear glass and you put water into it, and you put a straw into that glass. When you put a straw through water and you can see through glass, you will see that the straw will be bent, because that's how light affects what you see something in water. Water bends light, and that reflects your perception of the straw in water. But when you take out the straw from the glass, from water, it is straight. It looks straight. When you put it back inside into water, it looks bent. So which one is it? Right? So there are very simple experiments that you can do on yourself and with others, with just household items, to show that you cannot fully trust your perception. Yes, there are moments that you can trust, and on daily basis we trust our perception. So when I cross the streets, I trust that if I cross the street at the wrong time, I'm going to get hurt by a car. That is true, right? I cannot be skeptical that I can walk through a car and that the car does not exist, because that is not true. And if I were to test it, most likely I would die. So that kind of skepticism is dangerous. Questioning everything and believing nothing is dangerous, because then you cannot establish any truth. But a healthy dose of skepticism is very much welcomed and very much needed, because it's part of critical thinking and it's part of scientific thinking. It's basically calling out people to test it, to see whether it's actually true. It triggers curiosity. So when someone says, you know, people who smoke have always suffered childhood trauma. Well, is that actually true? Can we test it? Or is it just an opinion? It's just a belief that someone says because they think that it is true. But just because someone thinks that it is true or they want it to be true, that doesn't mean that it's true. So this way of thinking is very much part of the philosophical tradition of critical thinking. And the sciences, whether it's psychology, economics, biology, chemistry, physics, or any other sciences, have inherited these forms of, or these principles of thinking, and they have been very, very helpful in distinguishing between what is good evidence, what is bad evidence, what is logical, what is not logical. So science-aided thinkers or critical thinkers challenge old beliefs and forge new fact-related paths. If we didn't do this, we wouldn't progress as a species. We wouldn't have sciences. We wouldn't have philosophy. So another simple example is of naive realism or naive thinking or believing that your intuitions are true is, you know, the way you exist in the world. So we know that the earth is spinning all the time, but we don't experience the earth spinning. I'm sitting in my apartment and I don't experience anything spinning. When I get up and stand on the floor, or when I go for a walk and stop, the earth is not spinning. So it's a bit of a contradiction. According to science, the earth is spinning all the time at a specific rate or a specific speed. But when I experience myself living in the world is static. It doesn't spin. I move. Nothing really spins under my feet. So how can we reconcile the two claims? The earth is spinning, but I don't experience it as if it is spinning. Any ideas?
Ideas mean like Christopher Columbus when he had to discover if the world was flat or not, that type of thing.
Yeah, but how do you go about doing that?
Well, it's just the questions like how did he get the evidence to support that? And yeah, sorry, trying to like
Okay, no, it's
go
okay.
off of that.
I mean, Christopher Columbus was looking for India, right? And he came to
Yeah.
North America, and that's why North America natives are called the Indians, because he thought it was India. And funny enough, the name stayed. It has stuck, and we still use it, but it's inaccurate, really. So that's another mistake that we have held on to. But it's, you know, if we live on a rock that's round, that means if you start at a distance A and you keep going west or east, sooner or later you will come back to the same spot. And if that's the case, it must be round. If you start at a point A and you reach a cliff and there's nothing else there, then, well, it's not round. So, but with the Earth spinning, but the way we live on Earth, we don't experience it spinning. We need some sort of an explanation. We need some sort of a theory that would explain this phenomenon. So we didn't know how to explain this before, but now we know how to explain it. But I'm just using, and I will tell you how in a second, but I'm just using everyday examples to show that without critical thinking or without curiosity or without skepticism, we wouldn't discover things, we wouldn't create theories to explain everyday phenomena.
And then, sorry, one of our classes, critical thinking disciplines, does that come into play too with
Definitely,
this?
yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool.
Yeah, because critical thinking skills come from philosophy, and philosophy predates sciences. So if you read, let's say, Newton's work, Isaac Newton, the great physicist, when he was writing in the 16th century, or René Descartes before him, or Galileo or Copernicus, they talk about natural philosophy, and natural philosophy entailed natural phenomena, like, let's say, apples falling from trees, the phenomenon, why is there gravity? So Isaac Newton was actually interested, okay, why does the apple fall from the tree? What makes the apple fall from the tree? And if an apple falls from the tree, does the moon fall as well? And other rocks or other planets, now that we know, or stars or asteroids in our solar system. So if the apple falls on Earth, does the moon also fall? Okay, so without such questions, without such curiosity, you wouldn't have people delving or working hard to find out the answers. So curiosity, skepticism, but in this case, especially curiosity, like a child, why does this happen, and what is the name of that, and how does that happen, is very much needed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be interested in the world. So to go back to the Earth spinning example, but not experiencing it as spinning, you have to remember how the vestibular system works. And the vestibular system is located in your ear, in your inner ear, and it detects movement. So there are specific, and we will learn this as we go, when we talk about the central nervous system. But there are specific hair cells in the inner ear that detect motion, but not when motion is static. So let's say when your body accelerates, then the hair cells in your inner ear move. And when your body decelerates, slows down, like let's say in a car, or when you start running and then you slow down, then the hair cells are triggered. But when the speed is constant, let's say you're sitting on a train and you don't have any frame of reference. That is, the windows are boarded up, or let's say you're sitting on a bus and the windows are boarded up and you don't feel any friction that the bus is moving or the train is moving. So that means you don't have any frame of reference. And if the train or the bus is, let's say, traveling at 40 kilometers an hour, after a short period of time, you would not be able to detect that it is moving, because the hair cells in your inner ear only detect acceleration and deceleration when there's change in speed or change in motion, but not when the motion or speed is constant. So there's a way of explaining why we don't experience the Earth moving, because it's moving at a constant speed. But if it were to slow down or to speed up all of a sudden, we would definitely feel it jerking or disorganizing our lives or physical objects around us. And this is exactly what happens when you have an earthquake. So you can see that through science, through investigating human condition, the way human beings are wired up, or investigating other phenomena, why apples fall from trees, or whether if apples fall from trees, then does the moon fall as well, because it's also an object in the universe. We can, by asking such questions filled with curiosity, we can come to some answers, not necessarily always accurate answers, but sooner or later someone gets it right. with the help of previous experiments and previous questions and previous lines of thinking. So just to give you one more example, you know, people in about 200 years or 300 years, especially in Victorian Britain, thought that people who have high foreheads are intelligent. Now, is this actually true? Is there, you know, is there a close relationship between high foreheads and intelligence? It turns out that it's not true. In the same way that people used to think that bumps on the head represented specific faculties or abilities of the person. So if you had a bump here, if your skull was, you know, protruded out in some way, or you had maybe a big eyebrows, or the bones underneath your eyebrows were protruding out, then that maybe meant to some people that you have a lot of empathy. Now, is the shape of the skull related to specific faculties of the mind? Well, the only way to know is to test it. Because otherwise, if you don't test it, then that's where it ends. Now, is it actually true? This used to be called phrenology. It's not true. The way your skull is constructed has nothing to do with the way your brain works. The length of my nose does not correlate positively with intelligence. The two don't go hand in hand. And the height of my forehead has nothing to do with my intelligence or lack of it. So people in the Victorian era would shave their hair line higher so that they would have higher foreheads, because people thought that indicated that they are intelligent. So when you think about it now, it's funny, it's childish, but 200, 300 years ago, or even more, that used to be normal. Okay, so the only way to challenge such naive claims or erroneous claims about our world or about ourselves is to be skeptical, is to ask questions, is to investigate and conduct experiments. So that is why critical thinking is so important. And without critical thinking, we wouldn't have the sciences, none of it. Do you have any questions? Just want to share a different document from the book. So here you have the pillars of, or the principles, or the pillars or foundations of scientific attitude. And a scientific attitude is basically a critical thinking attitude. So you need curiosity, skepticism, and humility. So curiosity, how does the world work? So let's say someone says, can some people read minds? Some people say, yes, I can read minds, or some people say other people can't read minds. So if you're curious, then the question is, or is this actually true? Why do people say this? Or why do people say that we only use 10% of our brains? What does that mean? Why 10% and not 8%, or 9.5%, or 34%? What's so magical about 10%? And what does that mean, 10% of the brain? Does it mean 10% of the energy that the brain uses? Is it computational capacity? Is it how much glucose or nutrients the brain uses? 10% overall, or is it just one part of the brain? So when you start asking such questions very quickly to a person who makes such a claim, you can test them very quickly. What do they actually know? What they actually know about the subject or their claims? And if very quickly they fizzle out, they say to you, well, this is what I heard. then you know that they don't know what they're talking about. You can use just simple questions. What's the evidence? What does that actually mean? What's 10% mean in relation to the brain? And once you do that, you can quickly investigate through the use of critical thinking whether something is plausible or not, whether it's true or not, or probably true or not, whether it's bogus or not, whether it's bullshit or not. Okay. So I suggest you do that on a regular basis. It's pick the right moment, right? But because you might drive someone crazy, but it's a very good habit because there is BS everywhere, and you need a way to navigate through it, especially in the world of social media and just lots of information online. Remember, the internet is a wonderful thing. It has lots of information, lots of wonderful, great things, but there's lots of bullshit out there as well. And you need to have a way to navigate through it. And critical thinking, developing critical thinking skills will definitely help you in the future, not only to navigate through information, but also help you in the future, personally and professionally. And the other claim might be, are stress levels related to health and well-being? Some people might say, yes, evidently stress is negative. But is that true? How can we know? Right? So the only way to know is to conduct experiments, conduct surveys, observe people, collect information, and then draw conclusions, draw relationships between stress levels and well-being. So if you're stressed out and you're not sleeping well, and you're not sleeping well a few nights in a row, then you can even observe yourself. Not sleeping leads to bad memory, or leads to bad decisions, or leads to falling over. Not sleeping leads to depressed moods, or aggravation, or irritation. So even without going into literature, you can observe yourself for a few days. What's the relationship between not sleeping, let's say, because of stressful situations, and then performing specific tasks or studying, which is a very demanding, cognitively demanding task, studying, because you're collecting and analyzing information all the time. What's the relationship between the two? And when you notice that your mood improves, and your decision-making improves, and your ability to memorize information improves pretty quickly after you regain normal sleep, then you can say, well, there is definitely a relationship here. Let's say if other people have similar experiences, let's say what the scientific literature says about the relationship of stress to sleeping or sleeping patterns. And if you find a lot of studies and a lot of claims that match your experiences, then you know that the phenomenon is true, or the relationship is true.
Then will we use some specific way of critical thinking, such as, unlike if A is always true, then B is always true. But unlike this, will we use such way of thinking? I mean, if A is true, then B prefers, or B have tendency to be true.
Yes, so we won't go into deductive logic and inductive logic, because that you will do that in critical thinking. But sciences are empirical. That means they are mostly inductive. So sciences will not say it's always the case. When you smoke, you will always, when someone smokes, they will always develop lung cancer. They won't say that, but they will make an inductive claim. They will say that there's a higher probability that prolonged smoking will lead to lung cancer, which is actually true. And this is the evidence, the empirical evidence bears this out, shows that this is actually true. And the evidence is also there's also quite a bit of evidence that lack of sleep leads to bad decision making, deteriorating memory, change of mood, that is mostly negative mood, and so on. So sleep is very important for a healthy well-being, or positive attitude, or academic results. And the literature, the academic literature, shows that this is the case. Does this mean that if you lose one night of sleep, everything will fall apart? No. But if you lose sleep for a week, then it will. And actually, we know that if you stress animals, human beings or mice or other animals, for a longer period of time, they will die, because the human body needs to recuperate at night. And when it doesn't, organs will break down. Organs like liver, kidneys, the stomach, the heart, they slowly break down and you will die, basically. Stress can kill you when it's prolonged, let's say for a year or 2 years. So we have evidence to support this. Can people read minds? The only way to know is to conduct to conduct an experiment. Let's test it. You can test it with your friends. You can set up simple examples to test whether something like that is true, even without going into professional literature or academic literature. So skepticism is about, what do you mean sitting? How do you know? How do you know that something is true? How do you know that smoking leads to lung cancer? Okay. So skepticism is asking about the knowledge claim. If people say that, the pandemic is a hoax, is not real, then your question should be, how do you know it's not real? What's the evidence? What does that mean? What do you mean when you say, I know? You know what exactly? And if someone says if scientists are saying the vaccine works, it's quite effective, it's 95% effective or 96% effective, we should also be skeptical. We should ask, what does that 96% mean? And once you find out what 96% means, then you have a better grasp of what they actually mean by 96% effective, or 76% effective, or 50% effective. Okay. So when someone makes claims that they know something, ask him or her, what do they mean by that exactly? So when someone says, I play the stock market, I invest in cryptocurrency, you can make a lot of money. Okay, is that actually true? Who makes a lot of money? Can you lose money? Right? So these are the kind of skeptical questions, Are you investing yourself, or this is what you heard? Do you have any personal experiences, or this is what you believe? Because just because someone says something and other people believe it to be true, it doesn't make it true. Okay? So you should definitely get into a habit of practicing that kind of skepticism, questioning the claims that other people make. And the third level, or the third pillar, that is humility. If you conduct experiments and the experiments show that your theory or your claims prior to conducting the experiment, or what the experiment is based on, prove otherwise, show that your claims are not true, then you should exercise humility. You heed to the results. You say, okay, that's interesting. So either I was wrong, or maybe I didn't set up the experimental method properly. Okay, that's humility. Because people who don't have humility say, no, 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 I'm right. And they stick to their guns, metaphorically speaking. You know, you can't convince them otherwise. No evidence can convince them otherwise. So people who say, well, no, I'm healthy, I can smoke, don't worry about it. And you say, well, you know, in the long run, actually, the evidence show that most likely you will develop health-related risks, or you might even die because of it. And when people say, nah, I'm 19, I'm 18, I'm 25, I'm healthy, you know, nothing's going to get me. What are you talking about? That means they're not thinking skeptically. They're not even curious about their health, and they have no humility towards their own claims. So humility is the ability to come to grips, to face contrary evidence, to deal with the fact that you were wrong, to be open to learning new things. So people say, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yes, I haven't thought about that. The evidence actually shows my claims are not true, or someone else's claims, or scientific claims from previous years not to be true. Because the way science develops is not always by success. There are mistakes, there are errors made. And that's why when you conduct an experiment, you want other people to replicate it, to see whether it's actually true for other people. So if we're conducting experiments in Toronto, in Canada, we want to know whether people in China, scientists in China have the same results or similar results, or in Korea or South Africa, or I don't know, somewhere else, in India. And if everyone's getting the same, more or less the same results, that means there is something true. We have discovered something true, or we have discovered some sort of relationship, let's say, between smoking and lung cancer, or levels of stress and cognitive impairments. So that is what we want. We want to establish scientifically, we want to establish reliable relationships, or reliable correlations, or cause and effect relationships. Okay, I think that's enough about critical thinking. I can talk about critical thinking for a long time, because that's part of what I do and part of what I really love. But there are a lot of other things that we need to get to. So, do you have any questions in regards to what has been said so far? Okay. So let me go to. All right, so that's the importance of critical thinking. Let's go to psychology's roots or history. So there are quite a few names, and psychology is a new science. It's a social science. It's a science of the mind, but it's also science of the brain. So we have people like Wilhelm Wundt, who was a German. So that's why I'm pronouncing it as Wundt, not as Wundt. Charles Darwin, Ivan Pavlov, Freud, Piaget, James Calkins in the United States at Harvard, Margaret Floyd Washburn, who was the first woman to receive a PhD, if I'm not mistaken. So there are quite a few people who have laid the groundwork for us. Yes, Washburn became the first woman to receive a psychology PhD. So it has been hard for women to break through in the field because of because it was mainly dominated, just like philosophy and other sciences were mainly dominated by men. But today, the story is quite different. If you look at the statistics, employment statistics, actually, there are more women in healthcare than men, and I think there are more women in psychology than men at this point, especially with the new wave, a new generation really leading the way. Actually, when you look at academia in general and students in post-secondary educations, like let's say Centennial College or Ryerson or U of T or York University, there are more women in post-secondary educations than men. And it's actually a bit of a problem in Canada, how to get more young men involved in academia, how to get them to go to school or stay in school longer, that is. So women have really on average outperformed men in some sciences and in academia in general. So branches of psychology, historically we have structuralism, functionalism, behavioralism, humanistic psychology, cognitive psychology, and today we are in the era of cognitive neuroscience. And cognitive neuroscience is my area of specialty, but I will say a few things about all the other ones. So structuralism is the first school, and it dates back to Wilhelm Wundt at the end of 19th century in Germany. And Wundt was basically interested in structures of the mind. So he was interested in things like, for instance, if I clap my hands, what is the duration of the sound that is emitted through clapping in my mind? Or how quickly can I hear the sound? If someone claps in the next room, what is the delay between clapping and hearing the sound? How long does the sound linger in my mind or in my psyche? So that's basically what Wundt was interested in. He was the first one to also pioneer tools to measure. How do you measure? So do you ask participants, or is there a different way of measuring, a more reliable way of measuring specific perceptions or specific sensations in the mind? And functionalism with William James was and still is interested in what are the functions of the mind. If I remember things, why do I remember things? What is the function of memory? And if historically or biologically, from an evolutionary perspective, as a human being, I enjoy specific perceptions. I enjoy the perception of colors. I enjoy the ability to remember and to make decisions. I enjoy the ability to speak a language. Then there must have been a function, a survival function for such capacities or faculties to remain, to withstand the test of time during survival. So our ability to speak a language has something to do with the fact that language has been helpful for our survival. And my ability to remember things, although memory is not perfect and forgetfulness is part of how memory works, and that it's actually a good thing, but I'll talk about that later. Since we are capable of memorizing information and storing information and retrieving information from memory, that means memory has served a specific task, has served a specific function, a survival function for human beings. That's why it is still around. And if it wasn't if it wasn't conducive to survival, if it wasn't important for survival, then we would have lost it. Okay, so that is the functionalist perspective. What is the point of memory? What is the point of perception? What is the point of decision making? What is the point of mathematics? Why do we do it? Why is it still around as a form of intelligence, or as a faculty of the mind? Behaviorism looks at behavior, hence the word behavior, behaviorism, and it also looks to measure behavior or predict behavior. Okay, so for example, I collect air miles. So how is my behavior structured by the fact that I'm rewarded by collecting air miles? Well, if I go to specific stores like Metro or specific gas stations where I get air miles for which I can buy something or fly somewhere, then my behavior will be shaped as a consumer by air miles. And that is why a lot of businesses have points or have introduced a point system or a way of collecting points, as if you're collecting money, or points that will give you some benefit, or that you can purchase something with. So this way, you will collect my air miles by going to buying specific things from specific businesses or companies. And Tim Hortons does this now, and you can almost every business, it seems, provides some sort of a reward system in terms of points. Credit card companies do this on a regular basis, right? So that's how it works. Behaviorism wants to explain the human condition, or how humans behave or make decisions, by tracking how reward and punishment affects them. Okay. Does this make sense? Yes, no? Okay. So that's behaviorism. Behaviorism was not really interested in the claims of structuralism, how are specific perceptions, visual, auditory, olfactory, that have to do with smell or audition, with hearing or taste, structured in the mind, or with the evolutionary function of specific faculties, but it's interested in measurable behavior, or measurable behavioral output that can be measured, because it's much easier to measure behavior than to measure mental states, because we don't have direct access to mental states. I can't enter your mind and know exactly what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and when. I have to observe your behavior. I have to give you some sort of tests through which you will show that. I can ask you and you can tell me, but I don't have, as an experimenter, I don't have access to that. So behaviorists said, you know what, let's not worry about the mind, let's not worry about consciousness, let's not worry about the function necessarily, let's just worry about measuring behavior and predicting behavior, predicting decision-making based on punishment and reward, or the frequency of punishment and reward. And that way we will get pretty reliable evidence or data. Humanistic psychology looks at how to improve human human psychological life. So what are some of the ways we can learn from psychology to be, let's say, happier or more satisfied in life, to have better relationships with opposite sex or the same sex partners, or to have better relationships with other people in general, how to have better relationships with colleagues, how to be successful students. So now we know, from psychological data and health psychology, that sleep is very important for decision making, and sleep is very important for memory. So if sleep is very important for memory, it's all going to be very important for performance as a student. So if you go out drinking the night before your test, most likely you will not do very well on the test. Or let's say you're studying all week, and then the night before the test you go out drinking or have fun with your friends, and you come back at 4 o'clock in the morning and you have only 2 hours of sleep. Perhaps you will pass the test, maybe you will get a C or B, maybe even because you studied before, but maybe you could have gotten an A, right? That night before actually hampered your results, your ability to perform better than you could have. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with going out, and you should definitely, go out with friends, but just be mindful what you can learn from health psychology or psychology in general about forming habits, and habits that are good for you, that are conducive to a healthy lifestyle. So if you will drink on a regular basis and lose sleep, you will definitely do badly in the world of academia. You will not be a good student. Guaranteed. Sooner or later, things will fall apart. The wheels will come off. I was a student a long time ago, and I studied for a long time. So I can also speak from personal experience. But you don't have to take my word for it. I'm just one person. You can definitely look towards the literature, and the scientific literature, psychological literature definitely shows that specific habits, sleeping habits, and specific studying habits lead to either really good academic results or bad results. So that's what humanistic psychology is about: how to improve your life, how to live a better life, a more satisfying life. So sometimes this is called positive psychology in literature. Sometimes it is called humanistic psychology. Cognitive psychology, I'm just going to finish this slide, and we will take a short break. Cognitive psychology has to do with, as opposed to behaviorism, has to do with cognition, which is thinking processes. That is how we make decisions. What is intelligence? How does intelligence work? How do we measure intelligence? How does memory work? How many pieces of information can we retain? For how long? How well can we retrieve information memorized? How many pieces or data can we retrieve from our memories? How much do we forget? Is forgetting a good thing? Okay, so that is cognitive psychology. Are there different types of intelligence? And yes, there are, and that is what cognitive psychologists ask and try to answer. Some people have they have a flair, we say, for athletic behavior. They're really good at sports. Some people are really good at speaking. They have the ability to use language better than other people. They speak better, they use better, they're more eloquent, they use language more accurately. Of course, this comes with practice. The more you speak, the more you write, the more you read, you will improve definitely your speech and your ability to think and how you use language. But some people will always be a little bit better than others. But then others will exceed more in mathematics and logical thinking. So we have different types of intelligence, and it's not that one is better than others, but they're different. And so human beings can excel from the perspective of intelligence or thinking in different ways. Some people manage time better than others. Some people have to learn it. So we all perform cognitively in various ways. And cognitive psychology is interested in what are those ways and what are the mechanisms driving specific cognitive results or lack of good results. And humanistic psychology is interested in using such knowledge to improve our lives, to be more successful, whatever it may be. Personally or professionally. And cognitive neuroscience is interested in cognition at the level of the brain. So we're interested in the mechanisms of specific brain circuits and pathways, where cognitive neuroscience is interested in specific frequencies, oscillations in the brain, how specific exchange of neurotransmitters between cells, nerve cells, affect mood, affect decision-making, affect thinking patterns. So that is cognitive neuroscience. So neuroscience is basically the study of the brain, and cognitive here means that has to do with cognition. So intelligence, decision-making, memory, language formation and language use, mathematics, logic. So I'll just say a couple of things about this slide and then I'll give you a break. So psychology is a science of behavior and mental processes. Okay, psychology is interested in discovering or finding out, learning why people behave the way they do, why they make decisions the way they do, the kind of decisions that they do. And also what is a good barometer or what is a good way of changing human decision making. Do we reward people? Do we motivate people? Do we punish people? What is a good way of changing human behavior? And also about mental processes such as experience, memory, thinking, intelligence, decision making. Okay. Dealing with stress. So being a student can be quite rewarding and it can also be fun, but it can also be quite stressful. We can, as psychologists, we can learn something about stress and the relationship of stress to the well-being of students on average. Different people experience stress differently. Different people have different thresholds. The same thing for fear. You know, some people love to go to, let's say, Wonderland or go to parks with roller coasters. They get really, really excited. Even fear is not enough. Their excitement overrides their fear. And some people shriek. Some people are so fearful and anxious that they will say, no, there's no way I'm going to go on that roller coaster. I'm not diving, face down 100 kilometers an hour. There's no way. You can give me you can give me $200 right now. There's no way I'm going to do that, right? Because they cannot overcome their fear. So those are the individual differences. And psychology is interested in individual differences and how individual differences lead to specific decisions. So for example, for myself, in terms of roller coasters, I'm in the middle. I'm definitely stressed out and I'm definitely anxious, but I will go. You can convince me, right? But some people don't need any convincing. They throw themselves at an opportunity because it's so exciting, it's so exhilarating. And it's true. I believe I know it's exciting and exhilarating, but it's also mixed with a lot of anxiety and fear. So again, psychology is interested in human behavior and mental processes. And basically any combination of the two factors in relationship to each other. Okay, so let's take a break. So it's 9:37 on my end, so I will come back at 9. So it's 9:37, I will come back in 10 minutes, 9:47. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you. Okay, everyone, I'm back. Do you have any questions in regards to what has been said so far as a way of introduction to psychological sciences? Okay, then let's move on. Okay. So in this slide, you have various other perspectives, psychological perspectives. There's also the evolutionary perspective. How evolution has shaped the human mind or has shaped the human brain. Behavioral genetics. How do genes affect human behavior and human psychology, and also how the environment affects genes or the genetic makeup or the expression of genes, because now we know that in the 50s and 60s, when right after the DNA was discovered by Francis Crick and Watson, I think Christopher Watson, we thought that you are your genes. When genes are expressed as you develop, and even before you are as an embryo, you develop into an embryo. That is basically a sort of a deterministic way of looking. What genes you have will give rise to specific person that you are, bodily and psychologically. But today we know that there is a very close relationship between the genetic makeup that you have and the environment that you live in and your relationship with the environment. So there's a kind of a push-pull relationship between your genetic makeup and the environment. And the environment, depending on the environment where you live and your lifestyle, will turn on or off specific genes, okay? So that is a very important development in psychological sciences. So you should know from this science as a lesson that, the air that you breathe, the water that you drink, the people that you socialize with, the food that you eat, very important. Basically your lifestyle, how much stress you experience on a daily basis, how much money you make, whether you are respected or not in your environment, and the overall well-being or lack of it has a direct relationship on the kind of genes that are off or on in your body, in your cells. So that also explains why people get sick and some people don't get sick. And that partly has to do with what genes are turned on and off. Because I might have, let's say genetically, I might have the predisposition to develop skin cancer. But if I live in an environment where I protect my skin, or in an environment where I'm not exposed to long and harsh sun exposure, then the genes will not be turned on, and therefore the likelihood of developing skin cancer is very low, even though I have it in my genetic makeup. So my genetic story is one story, and it's an important one, but it doesn't mean that there is a cause and effect relationship between my genetic makeup and what I will be, or how I will be in the future, bodily and psychologically. The environment will play an important role on which genes and at what time will be expressed or turned on or off. So keep that in mind. This is a very important lesson that we have learned over the last 20 or so years. So choose your environment wisely, and choose your relationships wisely, and choose your habits also wisely. Okay, and as I said earlier, neuroscience is the science of the brain. So neuroscientists are interested in emotions, memories, sensory experiences as they directly relate to synapses, clusters of neurons, neurotransmitters, electrical propagation, sodium-potassium exchange in cells. Okay, how does that actually relate to memory or emotional states? And how does it develop, and how can it be improved? Or what kind of therapies can be developed to help the brain recuperate from injury, let's say stroke or a car accident or a lesion? So globally, we have a lot of psychologists working in various fields. So for example, like myself, my background is in philosophy and psychology, and I work in the world of academia. So you have academic psychologists who teach and also conduct research, or who only teach, but who stay up to date with the current developments of psychological research and who understand specific subdisciplines of it, let's say cognitive neuroscience or behavioral genetics or personality, psychology of personality or temperament or positive psychology or health psychology. And you have psychologists who conduct specific research. They're interested in specific research questions. You know, what is the relationship between, let's say, sleep and sexual behavior? What is the relationship between, let's say, Tinder and sexual behavior? What is the relationship between, let's say, just to go back to that because it's popular, social media and critical thinking skills? Okay, so some are very interested in specific topics, and then they will conduct research and write papers and share their findings with the rest of the world, so that their findings or their experiments or their methods can be replicated, can be questioned, can be criticized. That is the point. And of course, the end goal is to find out things, to learn things, because it all stems from curiosity, but it's also to improve our lives. So if there is anything we can learn from psychological sciences and apply it to our everyday lives, especially because it is conducive to a better life or a more fulfilling life, then that's great. That is basically the end goal. So there are different subdisciplines in psychology: biological science, psychology, which is interested in the brain, biological mechanisms that drive behavior and mental states; developmental psychology, psychology of development, that is the development of a child from we can say prenatal states to stages to postnatal stages to, you know, toddlers, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and so on, up until the moment of late stages of development and pre-death stages. Cognitive psychology, I have said quite a few things about that. Personality psychology. What is personality? What are the different traits of personality? Why are some people crippled by stress and some people are not? Why some people love going on roller coasters and some people don't? Okay, there might be an answer. There might be an answer in terms of understanding differences, individual differences in personality. Do we have specific types of people? People that fall into specific categories of personality or personality traits. Social psychology, how people behave and make decisions and think in groups. So there's social psychology definitely builds or has a relationship with sociology, which is also understanding how human beings behave and make decisions in groups. So let's say personality psychology is interested in individual differences. How the question, how are we different from one another? And social psychology is interested in how we are different from one another as cultures or countries or groups of people, or how we are the same when we belong to specific groups of people. What traits do we share? Health psychology is about using psychology or psychological research, findings, predictions to improve the quality of life. Industrial organizational psychology is about workplace psychology. How should companies be organized? How should we organize workplaces or companies or businesses to optimize human performance, but at the same time not risking drawbacks or ailments or psychological problems? How to structure work, and so on. So here are some prominent people who have psychology degrees. Mark Zuckerberg is very well known. And the co-founder of Facebook. Whatever you think about Facebook, whether you think it's a great idea, whether you don't think it's a great idea, definitely the idea can be quite beneficial to some people or some businesses, and can be quite detrimental to human flourishing or decision making, or influencing people, or manipulating people. So you have Natalia Portman, who was an actress, and there are many people, prominent people who have psychology degrees. That doesn't mean that they use psychology. Maybe they use a little bit of it, maybe they use more of it. Some people become professional psychologists, and they use psychological thinking, critical thinking, or scientific thinking, and psychological methods, empirical methods on a regular basis. So biopsychosocial approach, for instance, we get more of an interdisciplinary integration, complementary, where you take biological elements, psychological and sociocultural viewpoints to explain human behavior, decision-making, human mental processes. And this is important because behavior is biopsychosocial. You know, we are bodily creatures. That means we are biological creatures. We are psychological creatures because we have rich mental and psychological lives. And we also live in societies. Okay, I don't exist just by myself on an island somewhere. That's not true. When I go to work, I interact with students. Without students, I wouldn't have a job, right? And without myself, you wouldn't have students, probably, right? So we are all connected in many ways, which goes back to, the current problem that we have with people who say things like, well, I'm not going to get vaccinated, or I choose not to get vaccinated because it's my choice, it's my freedom, it's only my choice and it's only my freedom. Well, that's not actually true. What you do personally affects other people directly. Maybe what you do personally affects the happiness of other people, or whether other people live or die. So let's say if someone is a truck driver or a bus driver or just any driver on the road, if you're a good driver, then most likely you are safe, and you are, when you are safe, the road is safe for other people. But when you are a reckless driver, you could kill yourself or other people. Your family could suffer because of your decision making. So there are very simple examples from everyday life where we, one way or another, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, affect other people. Take another example, the federal election. We have a federal election, and I have already cast my vote, and many people will also cast their votes. And if you have a chance to cast your vote, you should definitely do so. But as a group, we affect what government we will have as a country. So it's not just my decision. Yes, it's my decision, but it's also a decision that will affect many other people because we vote as a group. And how we vote will determine more or less the future of the country and for the next 4 to, maybe 2 to 4 years, the kind of decisions, governmental and political decisions that will be made. So we make decisions together, therefore we affect each other. And to go back to the vaccine, people say, well, it's my choice, it's my freedom. Yes, you have certain freedoms, but it's also the case that by using your freedoms, depending on how you use your freedoms, you either give freedoms to other people or you take their freedoms away. So if the Delta variant is quite dangerous, and we know that it's dangerous, and people choose not to, let's say, be vaccinated, and they affect other people, then there are more people in hospitals. Perhaps maybe there are more people dying. So there's a direct relationship between the decisions that we make on daily basis and how other people are affected by them. So at the end of the day, we're not alone, and our freedoms are not only restricted, and our choices are not only restricted to our own bodies and our own mental lives. What we do with our bodies and what we do with our mental lives affects either directly or indirectly many other people. So just keep that in mind when you make decisions in the future, because I think the claim when people make that it's only my decision to do something, or it's my freedom and that affects no one, is erroneous. It's false. Because we live in societies and we affect other people either directly or indirectly, long-term or short-term or long-term. So that's what psychologists are really interested in, the relationship between bodily processes, biological processes, psychological processes, and also social dynamics, and the interplay between the three factors or elements. So, but there are specific commonalities that we can also point to between human beings, and we can, and because of them, we can say something general about human beings. So, a human smile, let's say. Human beings will smile for different reasons, but it is a natural phenomenon. We all smile. or we all laugh, or we all cry. So there are specific common denominators that we all share. So as psychologists, we want to, let's say, optimize or put on a positive spin or a healthy spin on what it means to smile. Let's say question, do people who smile more are actually happier or more content with their lives? Are fake smiles bad for us? If people use fake smiles like this all the time, does that actually affect them negatively mentally on long term? You know, when you go to the supermarket or a store, people in Canada, people ask the question, hi, how are you? Do they actually mean it, or is it just it's just a habit? It's just a cultural, politically correct way of behaving. Do they actually care how you are? You can test it. You can the next time someone asks you, hi, how are you? You can just tell them, I'm not so good today. I had a really bad week. Can I tell you more? And you will surprise them. They might say, I'm sorry, I'm working. I don't really care. I mean, and it's true. They can't care. They can't really spend a whole hour on a conversation with you because they have a job to do. So these are some interesting cultural practices and things that we do as psychological beings, but who live in cultural environments. And of course, such habits or idiosyncrasies, cultural idiosyncrasies, will differ from one country to next, and will differ from, let's say, one region to another. That is, sorry, not next, but another in a given country. So people from British Columbia might have specific habits, cultural habits, that are different from people who live in Ontario. And people from Quebec, let's say, who mostly speak French, will have different habits from those who live in Ontario or Alberta. So we have individual differences, we have cultural differences, but we also have commonalities between us, or traits that are common to all of us. And psychologists are interested in all of that. So please mute your mics, and so we don't have any background noise. And if you're ready to ask a question or comment, then please turn on your microphone. Okay, let's move on. So more interesting things, items or relationships that psychologists have discovered or are interested in. An age-old question that is, or controversy over relative influence of genes and experiences in the development of psychological traits and behaviors. Are we determined by our nature, our psychological constitution, or are we determined by nurture, the way we are brought up as children in specific families, by specific parents, by specific familial relationships, by the environment? Or is it the dynamic between the two? Both are important. Nature is important, that is your biological constitution, let's say your genetic makeup, your predispositions, psychological predispositions, and also nurture is important. Well, it's actually both, and psychologists are interested in the interplay between the two. So to use an analogy, if you buy a plant, the plant has a specific biological constitution. It is supposed to grow, it is supposed to, let's say, bloom, it is supposed to flourish. So it has that biological constitution. It is of a specific type. So let's say in my apartment, I have a money tree that's supposed to grow, it's supposed to bear fruit, and it's supposed to be money, but I don't see any money growing on my money tree. So I don't know. I think I was duped. Anyway, So I've accepted the fact that there's no money coming from my money tree, but it looks nice. And it looks nice but it looks nice when I keep it on the balcony or I keep it close to the window when it gets sun. But it doesn't do so well when I give it too much water, I noticed. I can give it water maybe every 5 or 6 days and not too much water. So there are specific environmental conditions that are very good for my money tree, even though it doesn't bear any money, and conditions to the contrary, conditions where my money tree doesn't do so well and it's slumped, and it's losing leaves, and it's changing color, and it looks like it's about to, keel over and die. So by changing the environment, I can change its, you can say, its life or its development. So that is a good analogy to think about the relationship of nature to nurture and vice versa. So to use a more drastic example, if a child is brought up in a family and the family members of that child, let's say the child is, every child is innocent at first, and let's say the child has average IQ, and with an average IQ of, let's say, of 99 or 100, one can do many different wonderful things in life. One can be quite successful in many different fields. But the child, unfortunately, lives in a family where the child is repeatedly told that they are stupid, dumb, and worthless. So if you have a child growing up in such a family, most likely the child is going to have a bad, really negative opinion of themselves, of itself, or himself or herself. And it's going to be difficult for them to overcome this psychological hurdle in the future. It might take quite a bit of work to overcome psychological abuse that it has suffered during childhood, moving into adolescence and adulthood. So the environment is quite important. And if you take the opposite, if parents raise their children in an environment where whatever they do is great, whatever they do is wonderful, then that's not good either, because that's not true of life. You don't always succeed in life, and you're not always wonderful, and you're not always brilliant. Sometimes you make mistakes, sometimes you're dumb, sometimes you're uninformed, and sometimes you make bad decisions, and sometimes you just need to learn the hard way. So it's important for parents and also friends to be true and authentic to their friends and their kids, because that is reflective of how the world works. So either extreme, either punishing kids and psychologically and affecting them negatively psychologically, abusing them psychologically, is very bad for them. Doesn't bode well for their psychological future or well-being. And the contrary is also true. Overly exaggerating one's children's abilities, capacities, intelligence, telling them they're always wonderful and whatever they do they are successful, it's not real, and it's not conducive, it's not healthy either. Somewhere in the middle is much better.
So I cannot consider gene and nurture are not individuals but influence each other.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So nurture will mold biology, and biology will influence the environment. But there's definitely an interplay, a causal interplay between the two. Okay, they don't exist individually of each other. Identical twins are interesting to study as well, and non-identical twins as well, because non-identical twins do not share the same genetic makeup. So if you have fraternal twins who are of different gender, sexual orientation, that is, first, and then later on gender, because gender is also performative. It's a social practice, not only biological. Then of course they are not identical twins. They have different genetic makeups, even though they might share some features. But identical twins or monozygotic twins share the same genetic makeup, and they're very interesting to study because we can see through such studies, observations, longitudinal observations or case observations, how genetic makeup affects, or how genetic material affects the development of human beings, children, and then adults, and then adolescents, and then adulthood. And also the features that they share or don't share. So if you have monozygotic twins, do they have the same aptitude for intelligence or language or mathematical skills? Would they develop the same driving skills because they have very similar genetic makeup? Or does that depend on the environment? So you can perhaps observe or maybe even manipulate the environment in order to yield specific results or to watch for specific results. Another interesting idea, discovery that has been made, or topic of contention, debate, and psychological research is vision. We are deeply visual creatures, human beings. Other senses are also very important for us, but the visual sense is quite important, if not the most important one. And there's a big chunk of human brain devoted to processing or representing visual information, and that is the occipital lobe that is located in the back of your brain, or the visual cortex, or occipital lobe is basically the same term for visual cortex. So according to some research, it turns out that we have two visual systems, one that is conscious and one that is unconscious. So dual processing is the principle that the mind processes information at the same time on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. So visual perception track enables an individual to think about the world, but also to act in the world. And according to some of this research, when we act, when we engage in behaviors in the environment, most likely we are not conscious of how we do it. So, simple examples are, let's say, driving a car. Once you master the task of driving a car, sometimes you can have a conversation. You do pay attention to the road, and you do pay attention to, let's say, the person next to you, or the passenger next to you who is talking to you, but you don't have to be mindful and conscious of every bit or piece of information in front of you or around you. You can sometimes kind of navigate on autopilot. And how is that possible? So according to this theory, it is possible because there is a visual stream that operates unconsciously, that is under the threshold of conscious perception, and also a track that engages conscious perception, or being aware of visual stimuli on a regular basis. Yet another discovery, you could say, in the last 50 years, modern psychology is highlighting the current developments in comparison to to historical ideas or ideas, psychological ideas that triggered psychological research and the study of psychological phenomena to begin with. So early psychology focused on understanding and treating difficulties. So let's say psychoanalysis or therapy is about understanding the relationship of childhood trauma and adulthood. So what is the relationship between childhood trauma and adulthood? So it's about understanding and treating pathology, you could say, with psychoanalysis. But contemporary psychology is interested in that tradition, but also extending it to research that includes human flourishing, so positive psychology or humanistic psychology. So looking at human beings and their mental lives and behaviors, not only from a pathological perspective, but also from a health perspective.
Professor, I have a question.
Sure.
Like the contemporary psychology, what does it mean by the tradition?
So the tradition is what I have said earlier: structuralism,
Okay.
functionalism, cognitive psychologists like Piaget, who was interested in thinking processes in children, or abstract thinking processes. Well, at what stage in childhood development children realize that when they have a coin that is worth 25 cents is actually more than having 20 individual cents. So children at one point think that because they have more coins, they have more value in their hands. They have actually more money. So at which point do they switch into more abstract thinking to understand that the value is represented symbolically by the number 25, not by the number of coins in their hand.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is cognitive psychology. That is a good example of cognitive psychology from the 40s and 50s and 60s. But it's also behaviorism, where we have Skinner or Watson or other behaviorists were interested in how punishment and rewards shape human behavior.
Okay.
Yeah.
So based on all the childhood experience, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is developmental psychology. So today, since psychology, has been around for more than 100 years, and we also have inherited a lot of psychological thinking from philosophy, which is, more than 2,000 years old. We could say even before that. In India and China have very long traditions, philosophical traditions, and in those philosophical traditions, there is quite a bit of psychological wisdom that we have all inherited with time. How can we use all of that wealth, all of that knowledge to improve our lives, or to be better versions of ourselves, or to maximize our performance individually and also professionally? That is what we are interested in contemporary times when it comes to human flourishing.
Okay. Thank you.
That'll be $200.
As usual.
Yes. It's not enough that you have to pay for the course. Now you have to send me an e-transfer.
I don't have it.
That's okay. So anyway, so that is so there are a lot of interesting things that we can learn from the history of psychology in conjunction with current developments in psychology. And we can learn professionally in terms of research, but also practical applications in individual lives, but also for groups of people, many people at the same time, when we when we teach children in schools. You know, what are the best practices? What are the best practices to for professional relationships? What are the best industrial practices? What is, you know, how should we relate to other people on a daily basis? How can we optimize that? How can we do better? What happens when things go wrong? Okay, so there are a lot of things that we can learn and study because of the ideas and the wealth of knowledge that we have inherited. So again, positive psychology is the scientific study of human functioning, whose goal is to discover and promote strengths and virtues that help individuals and communities to thrive. Okay, so how to deal with stress, how to avoid unnecessary stress. Now, stress is very important in our lives because life is just stressful. That's the default position. That's what it is. As human beings, there is always going to be stress, and some level of stress is important because it shows us that we are alive, that we are motivated, that we are challenged, that we are interested in the world, but also shows that we are afraid of specific things, that we should avoid specific behaviors, specific decisions, specific environments, or specific people. So what we learn is that happiness is a byproduct of pleasant, engaged, and meaningful life. And this is a very important lesson for many of us, and especially for students, or students that are younger than myself, because happiness is not a thing. Happiness is a result of many different things. And it is true, you cannot buy happiness. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you don't have the right relationships with people, if you don't have love and you don't have satisfaction, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Rich people commit suicides on a regular basis. Why is that? So there are different factors that affect happiness or trigger happiness. So when people say, I want to be happy, what they are really saying is that they want to live a fulfilling life. So I want to be happy is actually the wrong way of looking at it. It's not that happiness all of a sudden is going to come to you, or you press a button and all of a sudden you are happy. Maybe short term, but not long term. Long term requires work. And once you do things in your life that are fulfilling, you have good relationships with other people, you have loving relationships with other people, you are engaged professionally, and you take care of your passions. You establish good relationships at work and at home. You pursue your goals, you have enough time to sleep well, and you eat well, and you exercise on a regular basis. With all that in place, more or less, you will down the road be happy, because those are the ingredients for happiness. And when you reverse that formula, once you start taking away meaningful relationships, once you start taking away love, once you start taking away passions and freedoms to move and make decisions, once you start taking away exercise and healthy sleeping cycles, then you will see that human beings end up being unhappy. So happiness is a byproduct. It's an effect of specific actions, specific decisions, and specific relationships, not the other way around. Okay. So in other words, you have to work for happiness. And once you work for it, then you will be rewarded. That is what psychology teaches us. And I can also tell you that is the case from personal experience. But personal experience is important, but it's not enough. I am just one case, or someone is out there just one case. Now, individual cases can be important, but they can also be anecdotal. That doesn't mean that you can use them to say, general things about society or about human condition or about human psychology. Does this make sense? Okay. That's good. I'm just playing around with this Zoom features here. Anyway, okay, let's continue. So in the field of psychology, we have different disciplines and we have different professions. So clinical psychology, counseling psychology, psychiatry, community psychology, positive psychology. I have mentioned some of these already. Now, the difference between clinical psychology and psychiatry is that psychiatry is a field of medicine. So first you become a medical doctor and then you specialize in psychiatry. That is, you specialize in dealing with acute psychological problems such as clinical depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, hallucinations, and so on. And so psychiatrists will deal with also medication that could help you or could help people who suffer from, let's say, prolonged depression or schizophrenia. Clinical psychologists also deal with such cases, but they don't prescribe drugs, but they are very good at testing and they are very good at devising therapies for people who suffer from acute psychological problems. So if someone suffers from depression or anxiety long-term, let's say someone who withdraws from the world for a week or two, they don't want to leave their bed for an extended days or weeks at a time, then that is a big problem. And that needs to be addressed clinically, professionally. There needs to be an individual like that needs to be assessed, and then a clinical psychologist will devise, or a psychiatrist, or together as a team will devise a therapy moving forward. But if you're having, the states of depression are normal, states of anxiety are normal. So there's a difference between anxiety, let's say panic attacks or bouts of anxiety, being fearful or anxious about an exam or anxious about going on a date or anxious about meeting new people. That is fine. Everyone goes through that. Some people have less fear, some people have more fear. Some people are less anxious, some people are more anxious. But anxiety is always there. Some level of anxiety, whether higher or lower, is always there. And it's usually transitory. So when you find school to be partly quite fascinating and at the same time quite stressful, then that is normal. Many students go through that. So we have to accept that stress is part of human life, and feeling happy is not always going to be the case. So if you're feeling low today, but by the evening it's a little bit better, then that's normal. I go through that, your parents go through that, your children, your loved ones go through that on a regular basis. So that is normal, and that is nothing to worry about because it's transitory. All you can do is observe yourself. What makes me, how can I change my behavior? How can I change my habits? Because habits are very important to live a more fulfilling life, to be more satisfied on a daily basis. So if, let's say, some people may think, oh, okay, well, maybe I will start using. Can you mute your microphone, please? So that we don't have any background noise. So some let's say teenagers might think, okay, I will do some drugs because drugs will make me high or make me happy. Sure, they can try drugs, and it's not only teenagers, but other people can also try drugs. Some drugs are legal in Canada or other places. But then you can observe yourself, if you take drugs, do you actually feel better? Or do you feel more anxious? If you drink alcohol, does it make you happy for a short period of time or a long period of time? What's the price to pay for doing drugs or alcohol long term? Is it actually good for you or bad for you? Does it make you feel better or worse? If drugs and alcohol long term make you feel worse, or even short term, then your body is telling you something, and your mind is telling you something. It's not good for you, and it's probably not good for many other people. So sure, experimenting, being curious about the world is important, but also watching, observing yourself is equally important, and drawing conclusions from your experiments and behaviors is can be quite valuable. So I'm not saying here you shouldn't drink or you shouldn't take drugs, or whether you should, right? That's up to you, you know. But what is within your control is to observe yourself and change your habits. So, you know, if a beer or two makes you feel good from time to time, great. But if it doesn't, then that is a conclusion. That is something to learn from. So counseling psychology usually deals with marital problems, but also counseling psychologists work in schools, institutions like Centennial College or other institutions to help students deal with personal problems, school-related problems, bouts of depressive states or anxiety, and how to move forward, how to develop short-term or long-term therapies or methods to improve basically one's well-being, psychological well-being. So psychology, as I said earlier, hasn't inherited critical thinking skills, or has inherited the appreciation for the importance for the appreciation for critical thinking skills and the importance of critical thinking skills, or what's now called scientific thinking, when it comes to doing research. So psychology shows that common sense does not make sense, and intuition does not mean truth, and intuition does not, or belief does not mean wisdom or knowledge. So research shows that thinking, memory, and attitudes operate on conscious and unconscious levels. Most people's mental life happens automatically, but intuition can lead them astray. Just because you feel something to be the case, that doesn't mean it's the case. Whether it's something about yourself or something about other people. Okay, so when someone says, you know, I don't trust this person, I have a gut feeling. Now, your body has a lot of wisdom in itself. If someone rubs you the wrong way, there must be a reason for that. But that doesn't mean that your intuition is right. You can test it. Let's say you meet someone and they rub you the wrong way. There's something about them that you don't like, or maybe you are fearful of them, or maybe you are skeptical about them some way, right? Whatever it may be. So one way to test this is to see if by getting to know this person, your attitude and your intuitions or your feelings change. Because your feelings, your intuitions might be wrong. They might be based on fear. They might be based on previous experiences with other people who may look the same way, or who may act or have engaged in similar gestures or say similar things, but their personalities are completely different. So just because you think you don't like someone, that doesn't mean that they are unlikable, or it doesn't mean that you are in the right, or you know exactly why you don't like them, or whether you're actually right not to like them. Maybe once you get to know them, you will find out that you were wrong. Your intuitions were wrong. they were based on fear or previous experiences, bad previous experiences, and you were judging the book by its cover. Okay, so what seems commonly true, commonsensically true, the same way when I gave you an example with perception, if you look out into the horizon, everything looks flat. Therefore, commonsensically, according to your perceptions, the earth is flat. That is not true. The other example I gave you from perception is perception of motion. The earth moves at a constant speed on a regular basis, but you don't experience motion. It's a contradiction. So if you were just to trust your intuition, your sensual experiences of perception or motion, then you would hold untruth. You would be wrong, because the earth is spinning and the earth is round and the earth is not in the middle of the universe. So all of these things we have discovered through the empirical method, through testing and being skeptical and asking questions and asking for evidence. So sometimes we get things right and our intuitions are right. And I'm not saying that you should always be skeptical about your own intuitions. Sometimes they can save your life. Sometimes they are right. Sometimes you can explain them well, but sometimes they are wrong. So the lesson here is that don't believe or don't follow blindly your intuitions or your beliefs or your hunches, because they could lead you astray. They could be quite dangerous. So that's why we have to use critical thinking on a daily basis to navigate through biases and intuitions and beliefs that do not ring true about the world or about ourselves. And the only way to do that is to practice critical thinking and scientific thinking. So some of the common flaws that we engage in critical thinking is hindsight biases, overconfidence, perceiving patterns in random events. So what do you think hindsight bias is? Or when people say, in hindsight, it's always 20/20 vision.
Like I predicted COVID and everything of it.
Yes. Oh yeah, of course, considering everything that we knew, COVID was inevitable. Really. Right? Some might say, well, now you're smarter because it is after the fact, right? Now you have all this information. So we overestimate. We have a bias that based on the information we used to have, we would have been able to predict. But that is not true. That's a bias, right? We overestimate our abilities to think into the future. And this happens on a regular basis. Think about, companies. Let's say BP here is a good example of extracting oil from the ground, but doing so going through shortcuts, employing less people, maybe employing practices that save money. And by doing so, people think, oh, it's going to be all right. We have everything else under control. Just because we want to cut corners, save a little bit of money, use less resources, maybe less specialists, overall, we're going to be fine. Well, it turns out that that's not the case. Things can fall apart pretty quickly. And the case of COVID is a very good example of that. Think about a company like Boeing and the two accidents that have happened last year. Boeing went down twice in the span of 12 months. One in Indonesia and one in Egypt. Now, so now you have to look at the company. You have to look at decision making. Is it the fault of the plane? Is it the fault of the pilot? Or is it the fault of both? Or is it the fault of the company? What decisions did the company make that led to such tragic accidents. They did not learn from the first mistake. They had to commit the mistake twice in order to learn from it. And Boeing 787 MAX 8 is the plane that went down twice, has not flown since. It has, I think there have been tests to fly it again, and it has been shown to some extent to be safe, but at the same time, it has shown not to be completely safe. And then the other thing you also have to worry about is, do you trust the plane? I don't trust the plane. I actually don't trust the whole company. Such a well-established company, because of the mistakes that they have committed, because they were trying to cut corners, and because they were trying to save money, they were trying to speed up the development of Boeing 787 Air Max to compete with Airbus. Now that I know these things, I'm smarter or better for it, but I could not have predicted that that would take place, because my intuition, my belief was that Boeing is a well-established company, a well-established, successful company that would not make such bad mistakes. But that's not true. Even companies like Boeing or BP can make really bad mistakes that overestimate their ability to actually think into the future or prevent disasters. So I knew it all the time, all along, that this would happen. Is basically hindsight, looking retrospectively and overestimating our ability to think into the future. Overconfidence, people tend to think they know more than they actually do. And this is, something that plagues academics like myself. Just because we are intelligent in one field, we think that we might be intelligent in many other fields, but that's not true. Just because I specialize in specific topics in philosophy or psychology, that doesn't mean I have knowledge of chemistry. Or that doesn't mean that I am good at doing calculus. That doesn't mean I know a lot about that doesn't mean I have deep knowledge of the Canadian political system. I could, but it doesn't mean I do. I'm learning, but that doesn't mean that I'm competent, okay? So people do this on a regular basis. Let's in social behaviors. If you ask people, let's say a student is traveling internationally for school, like some of you, and if I ask you, okay, so do you think you're going to call your parents on a regular basis, every day or every other day? Oh yeah, no problem. I will call them every day or every other day. I will see them, I will FaceTime them on a regular basis. But is that actually true? Do you talk to your parents on a regular basis? Do you talk to your friends on a regular basis? Have you kept your promise? Did you know exactly how you would act? No. So we become overly confident in our claims about ourselves, in the knowledge that we have of ourselves, or limited knowledge that we have of ourselves, and we overestimate our abilities to keep our word, let's say, or to know exactly what's going to happen. This could happen in many different situations. Those are just a few examples. It could be related to driving. People who are good drivers are sometimes reckless drivers because they think that they're good drivers. But just because someone is a good driver in one instance, that doesn't mean that they're always good drivers. What if good driving in one instance leads to reckless driving in other instances? Or the inability to deal with novel circumstances on the road. And of course, that can lead to hindsight bias. Some people say, oh, I could have avoided that accident. Well, you only say that because now, you are smarter for it. But before that, that wasn't the case. Or people say, oh, yeah, I have full control over my car. You have nothing to worry about. I can drive a little bit faster. That's not true. You may have full control over your car, but do you have full control over all the cars on the road? You don't know what the other drivers are going to do, and you don't know how you're going to react. So that is also an example of overconfidence. Or students' overconfidence in dealing with assignments. That is a huge one. Some students think, oh, okay, this assignment will take me 2 hours to do, no problem. I can go out with my friends and then come back at 12 a.m. and between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. I will finish the assignment. Yeah, maybe you will, maybe you won't. The only way to find out is by putting yourself in that situation. Or maybe when you come back, you will have a few beers in you and you will be tired and you will want to sleep. Did you think about all of that? Maybe even if you didn't drink any alcohol, you could be tired. And when you're tired and sleepy, the last thing you do is you want to focus on doing an assignment. And even if you do the assignment, how well do you think you will do? Just because you've done previously well on assignments, even late at night or throughout the night, that doesn't mean you're going to do well on this one. This assignment is similar, but it might be different. It might require more work, better planning. So we overestimate on a regular basis because we are naive. We are not wise enough. We don't know ourselves that well. When you're 18, 19, 20, you overestimate all the time. Oh, sure, I can handle this. Oh, yeah, that's no problem. Really. It's kind of funny, especially when parents think about their kids and the way they overestimate their abilities on a regular basis. And I did the same thing. I made the same mistakes. You think I didn't write assignments during the night? Of course I did. Did I get a great score? No, I didn't. So that was it's a learning curve. It's a learning experience. You get your assignment back and you get a D or an F or a C+, and you're overconfident that you will get an A+ because it sounded and it looked so good at 4 o'clock in the morning. Well, reality check. It wasn't that great. Because you didn't put enough time into it, or you didn't prepare well enough for it, or you just didn't give it enough time because you overestimated your abilities. And I'm sure this has happened to you on a regular basis. So remember that we overestimate because we are overly confident in our abilities. It's a natural thing that we do, and you should be skeptical of it. You should be weary that you are as good as you think you are, okay? Are there any questions? Any maybe good examples from everyday life where this is true, or has rung true for you, or has rung true for your friends or maybe family members?
So nothing could be explain those things better than stock investors, just like my uncle.
Oh, stock investment. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, even though they failed over and over again, but they hindsight, overconfidence, and perceiving random events so they can actually earn more money.
Yeah, people, some people they go into stock market. I mean, I invest in the stock market and I'm learning things, and it's fun and it's a learning curve for me. I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and yeah, it's good. But people overestimate on a regular basis, especially if they have had some success. So let's say you go into the market and with your decision, it so happens you make a lot of money. Let's say you invest $5,000 and you make $10,000. So you think to yourself, I'm pretty good at this. This is not a big deal, And then you choose a stock and then you invest all your money, and in 2 months or 3 months you lose all your money. That could happen. That happens on a regular basis. Because you can't predict the market. No one can predict the market. Even the biggest, even Buffett can't predict the market. No one can. because it's a moving thing. It's a very dynamic thing, and there are many different factors at play. So you have to have humility. Just because you have been successful once, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful on a regular basis. Now, to say that is to be wise. I will not be successful on a regular basis in the way I have been last week. So that is a wise thing to do, and you should listen to it. But it's unwise to say, well, this is not a big deal. I just made $10,000, or I just made $1 million by investing into cryptocurrency. Surely I will invest more and make more money. But that could be exactly the downfall of going bankrupt next year, right? Or going to the casino and betting on one hand. That's how tragic things happen. But we do this because we overestimate our abilities, and we all are guilty of this. I'm guilty of this, you are guilty of this, and many, many other people are guilty of it. So it's important to keep it in mind and to be mindful of it, and to be skeptical over the moments when you overestimate, when you get the ego and the hubris takes over too much. Okay, it's good to have some humility and modesty and say, you want to invest $5,000? Well, maybe invest $1,000 and see how it goes over the next 6 months. Maybe one should learn more about the stock market. One should learn about which stocks are better, which are more reliable, and so on and so forth. The dividend rates and so on. I mean, there are a lot of things to learn, and when you do that, then you become better at making decisions. Any other examples? The stock market example is actually a very good example, and it gets people into trouble on a regular basis, and they have a rude awakening or a big wake-up call. Any other example from everyday life where you or someone else, you have been a witness to people grossly overestimating their own abilities or thinking capacities, or being able to tell the future? The other bias or hindrance in thinking is perceiving patterns where there are no patterns. Okay, so sometimes people look at the moon and they see patterns. Sometimes you look at the sky and you see patterns. And of course we see patterns because that's how our visual system has been constructed throughout the years by evolution. Human brain relies on patterns because it's a heuristic. That's how it's the fastest way to make a decision. So if you're lying on the ground and you're looking into the sky, you're looking at the clouds, if the clouds look like elephants or they look like, I don't know, people that you know, or they look like funny shapes or starships, then of course, most of us think that, of course, elephants and starships are not in the sky, but some people might think, oh, okay, this is a sign. This is a sign because when I look up into the sky, all of a sudden the clouds look like my ex-girlfriend. She's going to call me. Oh no, or oh yes, right? So we see patterns on regular basis. We are biologically structured to see patterns because it's much easier to navigate through the world that way. It's much faster, but the drawback is that we'll make mistakes. The benefit is that we make decisions quickly. But just because there's some sort of sequence to random events, that doesn't mean that we have uncovered some sort of truth about the world. So, I play the lottery with my friends at work, and, let's say we win 2 or 3 times in a row. Then we are forced to think in patterns. Okay, then let's use the same numbers, or let's play on Tuesdays or no, instead of Fridays again, because that has been lucky. But statistically, that doesn't really matter. But because we see patterns, we want them to be true. But just because you want something to be true, that doesn't mean it is true. That's a big difference. So our intuitions, our beliefs, based on specific pattern recognition, can get the better of us because we get excited, because we get emotional, and we think that we can predict the future, or we can reveal truth based on specific patterns of numbers or circumstances or events. So when you get overly excited about seeing patterns, let's say my friend used to say to me, you know, every time I look at my watch, it's 11 past 11. Why is that the case? Right? Something is going to happen. I said, yeah, it's going to be 11:12 in a second. And then after that, it's going to be 11:13. That's what's going to happen. And he says to me, oh man, you're so boring. Right? Because I look at things more logically than he does. And he gets all excited, you know, he thinks that there's a pattern, there's something happening behind the veneer of perception that is driving 11:11 every time he looks at his watch, 11 past 11, that is. The only pattern that is there is that 11 past 11 is going to be at the same time tomorrow. That's the only pattern. And 12 past 11 is going to be right after 11 past 11. That's the other pattern. But apart from that, it doesn't really point to anything else, unless we can reveal that metaphysically, you know, someone or something or God is manipulating the world around us, and we are discovering the patterns of how God moves or how supernatural powers move, right? But again, that is just a claim, it's just a belief. It doesn't mean that it's true. We would have to prove that it's actually true. And if we can't prove that it's actually true, then we should be skeptical. We should say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know how to disprove it, and I don't know how to prove it. Let's just wait and see what happens. Let's ask more questions. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Okay, what time is it? Is it 11 past 11? I think I have to exit full presentation mode to see time. Can you tell me what time it is?
11:08, sir.
11:08. We're getting close to 11:11. I should call my friend. And if I called him at 11 past 11, he would probably say, aha, I knew this was going to happen. Okay, so a few more slides and we'll call it a day. And the rest I leave to your readings, and we'll pick up next week. So this leads to this notion of post-truth or fake news, something that we are currently experiencing, something that has been, you know, propagated and advocated and defended by, let's say, people like Donald Trump and other people who believe in conspiracies. And you know, so for people like Donald Trump, whatever the media says must be false, because it's not what he wants to say. Okay. But just because that's not what he wants to say, that doesn't mean that it's true. Just like that doesn't mean that our intuitions, we want to believe our intuitions are true. Okay. So one way to do that, one way to strip respect and validity of the opposing party or the opposing or the other person when they want to appeal to, let's say, truth, is to say that whatever they're saying is fake news. And fake news is supposed to be misinformation. It's supposed to be not untruth or not true. Okay. But the only way to find out which party is right or which person is right is to actually dig deeper and to see who is right. Just because one person says to the other person, oh, that is fake news, that doesn't mean it's fake news. And just because one person says that is the truth, you should believe it, that doesn't mean that that is true. the best way to navigate is to use critical thinking, to ask questions, look for evidence, look for logical relationships. That's the best way forward. So we have people like this in society, and they have been with us for many, many, many years, who want to say that specific phenomena, let's say the virus today, COVID virus, or previous instances are untrue. Such phenomena are hoax. They are fake news. They're there to manipulate our lives and to take freedoms away from us. Okay. Now, whether that's true or not, it depends on evidence. So just because someone believes it, someone says it on Facebook or Twitter, that doesn't make it true. I can make up stories and I can post them on Facebook and Twitter all day long. And I could believe in them with my whole heart. It doesn't make them true at all. Just because I want something to be true, that doesn't make it true. Okay, so just remember that, and I leave the rest to you. But from my experience, the best way forward is to use critical thinking. So sometimes the biases that we fall prey to is that we want to believe something. So for example, let's say you are friends with someone and your friend has not betrayed you, but that one time they have betrayed you, and you believe that they have done you wrong, or they have betrayed you, they have lied to you, when you truly believe that they could not have lied to you. Now you are overestimating your ability to believe your friend because of your previous experiences, because you think that previously your friend has not lied to you. You want to believe that. You don't want to believe that your friend has lied to you. Your need and your desire to believe that overrides, blinds you, overrides your ability to look at the world critically. So just because your friend has not lied to you before, that doesn't mean he or she could not have lied to you recently. Is it possible that they could have lied to you? Yes, it's possible. If it's possible, then perhaps you should investigate it. You should watch for similar patterns of behavior. So our desire to believe something, or our desire to not to believe something because we don't want to believe it, gets us into trouble. It takes the better of us because we want to believe it. But just because we want to believe it, just because that belief makes us feel happy, or makes us feel good, or makes us feel comfortable, that doesn't mean that it's true. Truth oftentimes is uncomfortable. And you have to get used to it, because that's the way the world works. If experimenters want their theories or their hypotheses to be true, but if the experiments show that it's not true, if you go to the store and you buy supplements to improve your thinking, let's say ginkgo biloba, it improves memory. Take ginkgo biloba every day. You can test this very easily. You can conduct an experiment where people take ginkgo biloba and they do tests, and where people don't take, they get, placebo effects. They get placebos, and you watch for placebo effect. Or you can just watch your own behavior without falling prey to the placebo effect, because the placebo effect is very, very powerful, because we are psychological creatures. So just because you want something to be true, just because you want ginkgo biloba to work, that doesn't mean that it works. Just because you want ginkgo biloba to work and you tell your friends, oh yeah, you should take it, it definitely works, take it before your exam, you're going to get an A. Doesn't mean that it's going to work. Maybe it worked on you. Maybe what you think maybe your belief that it works is stronger than your ability to say, to tell, to perceive, or to know that it actually works. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's actually very important lesson about human psychology, about human ability to know and to distinguish what is true from what is not true, to be skeptical and to exercise humility. So it goes back to the example of someone telling you that we only use the 10% of our brains because they read it somewhere online, or someone somewhere in the world has said that we only use 10% of our brains. Now whoever says it, they want to believe that, and they want others to believe that. Now, whether it's true, it's a completely different story. Whether it's true, it's to ask questions and to experiment. That's the only way to navigate, to tell the difference between truth and untruth, or not, or lack of truth, falsehood and truth, relevance, irrelevance, accuracy, inaccuracy. Okay. Any questions here?
Well, I think you've already passed the time that you have to call your friend, and
Uh-oh, I'll have to wait until tomorrow then.
yeah,
So what time is
and
it exactly now?
it's almost 11:20, but exactly 11:17. So
Okay. All right, so thank you very much for that. That is quite useful. Keep me on track here. So we'll end it here, and I'll pick up on some points next week. I want you to make sure you study the entire chapter from the book. Make sure you go over the rest of the lecture notes, but the lecture notes are not that important. What's more important is to go through everything that's in the book, and then to reuse the lecture notes just to highlight the most important things and to follow lectures. So ideally, what I want you to do is to be prepared with having read the chapter before I see you, before I quote unquote see you or interact with you during class on Thursday mornings. So you should have read by next week. Make sure you read. Make sure you have the next chapter read from cover to cover. And this way we'll be able to interact more, have more questions and answers as we move through the lecture notes. Okay, with that being said, do you have any questions?
easy come, easy go. Will you let us go?
That's good. So in the name of Queen, the great band that it was and still is, I will let you go. But it's not going to be easy come, easy go. That's for sure. All right. Take care, everyone. And I'll talk to you and maybe see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.